A new report from Punchbowl News says that Amazon is looking to avoid the blame for raising prices as a result of President Trump's new tariff.
Amazon CEO Andy Jassy stepped into the spotlight this morning with a stark declaration that sent ripples through boardrooms, stock tickers, and living rooms across the nation. Faced with the unprecedented decision by the newly sworn-in President Donald Trump to impose sweeping tariffs on key trade partners, Amazon has concluded that continuing to sell goods sourced from beyond U.S. borders has become financially untenable. The e-commerce giant will suspend sales in the domestic market rather than absorb the crushing cost increases now imposed on the products powering its vast marketplace. Observers are scrambling to understand what this means for everyday shoppers who have come to rely on Amazon's convenience, for small businesses selling through its platform, for the broader American economy, and for international trade relations already teetering on the brink. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. From its humble beginnings as an online bookseller to its current position as a global retail and technology powerhouse, Amazon has always championed low prices and speedy delivery as core promises to customers. Now that pledge collides with a new reality defined by tariffs that can reach into the triple digits on imports from steel to electronics and even apparel. President Trump's latest round of levies targets long-standing trade partners in Asia and Europe, aiming ostensibly to pressure them into renegotiating agreements perceived as unfair to U.S. workers. Yet, by slapping prohibitive duties on products manufactured abroad, the administration has triggered a sudden surge in costs for Amazon. Internal analyses reportedly showed that passing those prices on to consumers would shatter the company's hallmark everyday low-price strategy, while absorbing them through margin cuts would threaten profitability on the razor-thin margins that underlie many of its operations. Rather than compromise its value proposition, or see its financial performance hammered, Jeff Bezos' successor opted for a dramatic retreat from the U.S. market. The announcement blindsided many longtime observers who believed Amazon's scale and vertical integration from its fulfillment centers to its Amazon Web Services cloud division would insulate it from trade policy shocks. Yet the logic is unmistakable. A tariff adds a flat percentage to the cost of each imported item, and with millions of such transactions every day, the cumulative impact on Amazon's bottom line becomes astronomical. Rather than allow global tensions to dictate its pricing and unravel years of customer goodwill, the decision was made to temporarily halt U.S. sales of any product that could not be sourced domestically without prohibitive price tag increases. The implications of this move will be felt almost immediately by millions of household shoppers accustomed to ordering necessities and luxuries at the click of a button. Categories most directly affected include consumer electronics, home goods, apparel, toys, automotive parts, and tools. Virtually every product segment in which foreign manufacturing dominates supply chains. Customers might see empty storefront pages or error messages when attempting to purchase items made in countries now subject to high tariffs. Prime subscribers who expect 2-day delivery on everything from kitchen appliances to fashion accessories could find themselves staring at delays measured not in hours, but in weeks or months, as Amazon scrambles to adapt or awaiting government relief. Beyond the immediate inconvenience to consumers, a cascade of second-order effects will reshape the small business ecosystem that has flourished under Amazon's umbrella. Tens of thousands of independent sellers rely on the platform to reach national audiences they could never access otherwise. Many of these merchants import products directly from overseas manufacturers, leveraging Amazon's logistics network to distribute at scale. With domestic sales suspended, these small enterprises will lose critical revenue streams overnight. Some may scramble to pivot to artisan or locally made goods, but establishing new supplier relationships, ensuring quality, and navigating domestic regulations are time-intensive undertakings. Others may turn to alternative marketplaces or abandon e-commerce entirely, with potentially catastrophic consequences for entrepreneurs whose livelihoods depend on volume sales through Amazon. The decision also places immense pressure on American manufacturers to fill the supply vacuum. Producers of household electronics, clothes, and consumer goods, once relegated to niche or high-end segments, now face demand surges from both Amazon and direct-to-consumer channels. While some domestic firms may welcome the opportunity to scale up production and hire new workers, many lack the capacity, capital, or expertise to ramp up on short notice. Supply chain bottlenecks could emerge for raw materials and components that still require foreign imports, such as semiconductors or specialized fabrics. Even if new tariffs carve out exemptions for intermediate goods, the complexities of global manufacturing networks mean that costs will rise somewhere, ultimately being passed along to American consumers. Investors and market strategists are already debating how Amazon's retreat might affect its sprawling web of services. AWS, the cloud computing arm that generates the majority of the company's profits, operates largely independently of retail. Yet any dent in retail revenues could weigh on overall sentiment and put pressure on the corporate valuation. Wall Street analysts will likely revise earnings forecasts downward for the current quarter, possibly triggering a sell-off in technology stocks sensitive to trade policy developments. On the flip side, AWS might attract even more attention as a stable revenue stream impervious to tariffs, leading to speculation about spin-offs or strategic realignments within the company. From a geopolitical standpoint, this turn of events underscores the precarious balance between domestic political aims and the realities of a globalized economy. The president's intention to use tariffs as leverage in trade negotiations is hardly novel. Yet the immediate fallout reveals just how dependent American businesses have become on international sourcing networks. Critics of the tariffs will point to Amazon's suspension as evidence of policy overreach, suggesting that raising costs to consumers and crushing a major U.S. company were not intended outcomes. Proponents, on the other hand, might argue that this bold demonstration of American manufacturing's return to prominence is exactly the jolt needed to force a realignment of trade terms in favor of domestic interests. As Amazon restructures its fulfillment strategies, the logistics sector braces for upheaval. The company's warehouses and delivery infrastructure are optimized for high-volume goods flowing across state lines. Redirecting those flows to domestically produced items may require rewiring procurement processes, retraining warehouse staff on new products, and renegotiating contracts with third-party logistics providers. Trucking companies, rail operators, and maritime shippers, accustomed to moving goods across borders, will see a sudden drop in volume. While some of that traffic may be rechanneled to bring raw materials into domestic factories, the net effect could be a contraction in freight demand, at least in the short term. The ripple extends to ports and customs brokers who handle paperwork and inspections on cross-border shipments. With fewer containers destined for Amazon's distribution centers, port revenues could dip, creating localized economic challenges in coastal communities. Meanwhile, major retail competitors such as Walmart, Target, and Costco are sizing up the opportunity. They may accelerate their own efforts to localize supply chains or renegotiate vendor agreements to maintain competitive pricing. Walmart, in particular, has been investing heavily in both physical and e-commerce capabilities, signaling readiness to win over customers disillusioned with Amazon. Yet these retailers face many of the same sourcing challenges and could be forced to pass higher costs to shoppers or absorb margin hits. The net effect might be a broader inflationary impulse across consumer goods, forcing policymakers to weigh the trade-off between supporting domestic producers and keeping living costs in check. For policymakers, Amazon's declaration serves as a cautionary tale. It reveals the tangible costs of isolationist trade measures and underscores the complexity of disentangling supply networks that evolved over decades. Aggressive tariffs may yield bargaining chips in negotiations, but they also carry the risk of collateral damage to domestic economic champions. The administration now confronts a dilemma: either soften the tariffs to prevent further self-inflicted harm, or double down in hopes of forcing trade partners to capitulate, risking deeper disruptions to the American consumer market. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle will likely weigh in, with some pushing to exempt consumer-facing goods from duties and others demanding tougher stances to revive domestic manufacturing. Public reaction is already polarized. Some patriotic consumers rally behind the move, praising Amazon for refusing to let foreign tariffs undermine American jobs and commerce. Others lament the sudden disappearance of product variety and unbeatable prices, lamenting a return to limited in-store selections and outdated shopping models. Social media platforms are awash with stories of shoppers unable to find everyday items, from phone cases to power tools. Small business owners share harrowing accounts of canceled orders and stranded inventories. Advocacy groups for domestic industries spotlight the moment as validation of long-standing calls for reshoring and higher import barriers. Meanwhile, economists caution that the full cost of tariffs will ultimately be paid by American households, whether through higher sticker prices or reduced access to the latest innovations. The suspension of Amazon's U.S. retail operations also carries broader implications for global e-commerce trends. Marketplaces such as Alibaba and JD.com in China may seize the moment to expand their international footprints, circumventing U.S. distribution networks by forging partnerships with local players in other regions. Cross-border commerce could fragment as companies seek lower-cost channels, potentially diminishing the integration that defined the past 2 decades of internet-driven trade. At the same time, emerging markets might see increased investment as sellers divert attention away from the tariff-hit American consumer base. Countries in Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America could emerge as new hotspots for e-commerce growth, benefiting from talent pools, manufacturing capabilities, and more favorable trade terms. Technology providers that supply logistics software, payment systems, and marketplace infrastructure will need to pivot quickly. Many have built solutions tailored explicitly to Amazon's workflows and APIs. With those integrations now under review or sidelined, firms specializing in fulfillment as a service and multi-channel retail management will vie for business from brands seeking alternative distribution channels. Fintech companies may accelerate development of cross-border payment tools that sidestep traditional banking rails prone to tariff-related delays. Meanwhile, digital marketing agencies will refocus on domestic ad placements and localized campaigns rather than global reach, reshaping the competitive landscape for advertising dollars spent by e-tailers. Analysts note that Amazon's cloud computing division, Amazon Web Services, stands apart from its retail arm in this crisis. As companies scramble to adjust supply chains and store data on alternative platforms, demand for scalable cloud infrastructure could rise. AWS may see new enterprise customers migrating workloads or launching analytics projects to model tariff impacts and optimize sourcing strategies. Internal strategy sessions are reportedly underway to evaluate whether a partial spin-off or increased investment in AWS is warranted, given its relative insulation from the direct effects of trade policy. Such moves could mark a strategic pivot for Amazon, leaning into the services side of the business even more heavily while its retail operations navigate a period of retrenchment. In boardrooms across corporate America, the Amazon decision is a case study in risk management and strategic trade-offs. Companies will revisit contingency plans for policy shocks, re-examine dependency on single markets, and evaluate the elasticity of consumer demand when price increases loom. Diversification of manufacturing locations and the pursuit of near-shoring strategies will accelerate, with firms exploring partnerships in Mexico, Canada, and other countries within preferential trade agreements. Supply chain executives will scrutinize the assumed reliability of just-in-time inventory models and weigh the benefits of onshore warehousing despite higher labor costs. The era of lean, globalized sourcing is colliding with renewed emphasis on resilience and geopolitical hedging. Consumers, too, will adapt to a new landscape. Shopping habits shaped by years of frictionless online purchasing may transition back to hybrid models combining brick-and-mortar visits with selective e-commerce orders. Subscription services offering curated product bundles made domestically could gain traction as a way to bypass broken global supply lines. DIY enthusiasts and makers may invest in local fabrication technologies like 3D printing to fill gaps left by vanished imports. Meanwhile, loyalty programs may shift focus from price discounts to exclusive access or experiential rewards as companies seek to maintain engagement without relying solely on low prices. While the immediate focus rests on consumer goods, the ripple effects could extend into other sectors reliant on global trade. Industries such as automotive manufacturing, aerospace, and pharmaceuticals all depend on complex networks of suppliers. If tariffs on intermediate goods are not carved out or renegotiated swiftly, American factories could experience delayed parts deliveries and cost overruns. Research partnerships with overseas institutions may slow if equipment imports are delayed, or researchers must navigate new customs hurdles. Even cultural exchanges could suffer if tariffs encompass media goods such as books, films, and music manufactured abroad. The boundary between commerce and culture blurs when trade barriers reshape availability of creative works. As Amazon's leadership convenes emergency strategy sessions, the company's legal department pores over every clause in its supplier contracts to identify potential force majeure protections or renegotiation opportunities. Since most agreements hinge on delivery timelines and price commitments, Amazon is now assessing where it can invoke hardship clauses to delay shipments without penalty, or where it might pressure manufacturers and vendors to share some of the tariff burden. At the same time, procurement teams are racing to vet new domestic suppliers, scrutinizing production capacities, quality assurance processes, and lead times. The daunting reality is that even if tariffs are temporarily lifted on certain categories, establishing reliable domestic sources of goods that align with Amazon's volume requirements and standards will take months, if not years. Companies that previously considered selling primarily through brick-and-mortar channels now find themselves courted by Amazon as potential partners in rapid scale-up initiatives. Inside Amazon's fulfillment centers, managers are forecasting significant changes in inbound inventory profiles. Pallets of electronics once arriving from overseas will gradually be replaced by shipments from US-based factories. But initial volumes are expected to be a fraction of current levels. This contraction means reconfiguring storage allocations, adjusting picking algorithms, and retraining robotic systems that have been calibrated to package specific overseas brands. Warehouse staff face the prospect of learning new product lines on the fly, from power tools made in the Midwest to artisanal kitchenware produced in small American workshops. The learning curve could temporarily slow fulfillment velocities, threatening Amazon's hard-won reputation for expediency. In response, the company is exploring nutrition breaks for fulfillment employees, affording them structured time to familiarize themselves with new inventory through interactive training modules and hands-on demonstrations. Beyond Amazon's immediate operational overhaul, the broader retail landscape is undergoing seismic shifts in consumer loyalty. After years of intense brand wars fought on price and convenience, shoppers may begin to reevaluate the merits of American-made goods versus imported alternatives. Some consumers will willingly pay premiums to support U.S. manufacturers, viewing higher costs as a patriotic investment. Others, especially budget-conscious households, may resent the forced trade-off and seek out discount retailers or resale marketplaces where used or off-brand imports still circulate. In both cases, the psychology of consumption is evolving. Price sensitivity is now entangled with political identity, and purchasing decisions carry newfound symbolic weight. Market researchers are already designing studies to capture these emerging attitudes, deploying sentiment analysis tools on social media, and conducting in-depth interviews in key demographic segments. Small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, outside of Amazon's ecosystem are experiencing a corresponding ripple effect. Those that specialized in filling niche demands on third-party platforms must now decide whether to forge direct-to-consumer channels on their own websites, negotiate storefront deals with regional malls, or partner with wholesalers expanding their brick-and-mortar footprints. Transitioning away from Amazon entails substantial investments in website development, customer service infrastructure, and digital marketing, capabilities many SMEs have traditionally outsourced. As a result, a surge in demand for white-label e-commerce solutions and marketing agencies is anticipated. Tech incubators and local chambers of commerce are already organizing workshops on topics like search engine optimization, inventory management software, and fulfillment partnerships. This wave of entrepreneurial adaptation could foster a new generation of agile, vertically integrated small businesses. Financial markets have grown increasingly fractious as analysts parse Amazon's earnings calls for indications of contingency planning. Short sellers have targeted the stock, arguing that retail revenue contractions will depress free cash flow and strain capital allocated to long-term innovation projects. Meanwhile, debt investors are watching Amazon's corporate bond yields for signs of credit rating pressure. If rating agencies perceive a sustained hit to the company's core retail profitability, borrowing costs could tick upward, complicating funding for future expansions of distribution networks or automation initiatives. On the equity side, activist investors are pressing management to articulate clearer metrics for the separation or ring fencing of retail and cloud computing divisions, suggesting that a demerger might enhance shareholder value by insulating AWS from retail-specific policy shocks. At the international level, Amazon's pullback from U.S. retail sales catalyzes fresh diplomatic negotiations. Trade representatives from affected countries, particularly China, Germany, and South Korea, have issued formal protests, threatening to retaliate with tariffs of their own on American agricultural exports and high-value services. Behind closed doors, U.S. trade officials are attempting to mediate, proposing carve-outs for essential consumer goods or temporary tariff waivers in exchange for concessions on digital services, regulation abroad. These discussions unfold against the backdrop of upcoming multilateral forums, where stakes are high for both the administration and its trading partners. The outcomes will likely influence not just Amazon's prospects, but also the global trade architecture governing technology, intellectual property, and supply chain security. In parallel, advocacy groups and think tanks are mobilizing policy briefs recommending targeted adjustments to the tariff regime. Some propose a two-tier system that exempts intermediate and consumer goods from the highest duty brackets while maintaining penalties on luxury items and finished products that can feasibly be made domestically. Others call for investment tax credits to help U.S. manufacturers scale up quickly, thereby reducing Amazon's need to seek exemptions. Lobbyists representing regional economic development agencies are pushing for increased funding to expand domestic industrial parks and workforce training programs in inner-city communities that could serve as manufacturing hubs. The pace and direction of these debates will determine whether Amazon's sales suspension becomes a temporary tactical retreat or a harbinger of a fundamentally altered supply chain. Meanwhile, Amazon's internal culture is at a crossroads. The leadership principles that have historically emphasized customer obsession and frugality now intersect with a renewed focus on resilience and long-term thinking. Town hall meetings with employees have shifted from celebrating Prime Day sales records to collaborative workshops on strategic procurement and risk mitigation. Cross-functional task forces bring together personnel from sourcing, legal, logistics, and public policy to brainstorm contingency blueprints for future geopolitical disruptions. The intent is to cultivate a more adaptive organizational mindset, one that anticipates policy volatility and embeds flexibility into contract structures, supplier networks, and technology platforms. If successful, these efforts could reshape Amazon's managerial DNA for decades to come. On the consumer front, educational campaigns by Amazon aim to manage expectations and retain brand loyalty. The company plans to launch a series of short, transparent videos explaining the origins of tariffs, the complexities of global sourcing, and the reasons behind temporary unavailability of certain items. By unveiling behind-the-scenes glimpses of domestic factories and introducing customers to American artisans now supplying the platform, Amazon hopes to humanize the transition and foster a sense of shared sacrifice. These communications will be carefully monitored through engagement metrics, watch time, social shares, sentiment scores, to refine messaging in real time. A successful narrative could mitigate churn among Prime subscribers by framing the situation as a collective effort to strengthen U.S. manufacturing. As online traffic patterns shift, Amazon's digital analytics teams are tracking the emergence of tariff shopping behaviors. Preliminary data indicates that search queries for terms like Made in USA, American-made electronics, and domestic apparel have spiked exponentially since the announcement. Price comparison tools embedded within the Amazon app are being retooled to include a tariff view that shows customers the incremental cost added by duties compared to pre-tariff prices. For the first time, many consumers will see a clear breakdown of how trade policies directly impact the final purchase price, potentially raising public awareness of the often invisible economics behind e-commerce. Academic institutions are also engaging with the fallout, as business schools incorporate Amazon's predicament into case studies on global strategy. Professors of supply chain management and international trade law are updating curricula to include modules on tariff risk assessment and contingency supplier mapping. Students in MBA programs are analyzing real-time data feeds and building simulation models to propose optimized sourcing strategies under varying tariff scenarios. In parallel, public policy scholars are examining the balance between protectionism and free trade, using Amazon's decision as a tangible example of policy consequences. These scholarly endeavors will produce a new wave of research papers, conference panels, and policy recommendations that inform future administrations. Media outlets, both legacy and digital native, have shifted editorial coverage from speculation about Amazon's next product category to detailed explorations of the social and economic ramifications of its U.S. withdrawal. Podcasts and live streams host panels with laid-off contract workers, struggling small business owners, and economist guests debating the merits and pitfalls of high tariffs. Photojournalists produce immersive features on shuttered ports, once humming with Amazon-bound shipments, while data journalists map the sudden collapse of import volumes by state and industry. This proliferation of stories ensures that public discourse around trade policy will remain intense and multifaceted for months to come. At the same time, fintech startups and alternative payment platforms see opportunities to disrupt cross-border trade dynamics. By leveraging blockchain-based provenance tracking and dynamic currency hedging, these firms seek to reduce the hidden costs of international commerce and offer Amazon-like marketplaces that minimize tariff exposure. Pilot projects in Latin America and Southeast Asia test low-cost logistics networks that bypass traditional port infrastructure. If successful, these innovations could eventually present a viable challenge to Amazon's dominance, particularly in markets less entangled in U.S. tariff policies. Consumer advocacy organizations are mobilizing legal challenges, questioning whether Amazon's mass suspension of foreign-sourced goods violates antitrust or consumer protection statutes. Complaints filed in multiple jurisdictions allege that the tactic, while a response to government policy, ultimately restricts competition and choice in the marketplace. Regulators may be compelled to investigate, potentially requiring Amazon to maintain limited sales windows or transparent justifications for product delistings. The outcome of such inquiries could set important precedents for the interplay between corporate strategy and public policy. Despite the turmoil, pockets of opportunity emerge for entrepreneurs and innovators. Makerspaces and fabrication labs in Rust Belt cities gain new patronage from designers wanting to prototype goods that meet Amazon's domestic sourcing requirements. Collaborative ventures between universities and industry produce pilot runs of high-tech products, drones, wearable devices, and smart home sensors, assembled entirely in the United States. Investors in venture capital firms pivot more funding toward onshore hardware startups, anticipating increased demand from large-scale buyers like Amazon. Over time, this ecosystem could spur a renaissance of American advanced manufacturing, rebalancing the global tech landscape. Amid these shifts, the labor market itself is poised for transformation. With domestic factories ramping up to meet new demand, a surge in manufacturing jobs is likely. Yet these positions will not mirror the roles once filled by warehouse pickers and delivery drivers. Instead, they will demand technical skills in operating CNC machines, programming robotic assembly lines, and maintaining advanced production equipment. Vocational schools and community colleges are already updating curricula to include these competencies, forging partnerships with regional manufacturers to offer apprenticeship programs. As a result, the conventional divide between blue-collar and white-collar work may blur, giving rise to a new class of skilled production roles that blend hands-on craftsmanship with digital savvy. Concurrently, environmental considerations gain prominence. Shortening supply chains by relying on domestic production can reduce carbon emissions associated with transoceanic shipping, but the increased energy consumption of U.S. manufacturing plants may offset some of those gains. Policymakers and corporate sustainability officers will need to collaborate on clean energy solutions. Solar installations for factory rooftops, electrified trucking fleets, energy-efficient machinery, to ensure that reshoring does not exacerbate climate impacts. Green certifications and carbon labeling could become selling points for domestically produced goods on Amazon's platform, offering consumers a transparent view of environmental footprints alongside Made in USA badges. Intellectual property protection also enters the spotlight. As manufacturing shifts back to American soil, concerns over patent infringement and trade secret theft could diminish, enabling companies to innovate more freely without fear of unauthorized overseas replication. This environment may encourage firms to invest in research and development domestically, knowing that the risk of intellectual property leakage is reduced. Over time, Such a shift could accelerate the commercialization of new technologies, biotech instruments, advanced materials, autonomous vehicles, fostering an innovation ecosystem tied closely to domestic manufacturing capabilities. Culturally, the ethos of American entrepreneurship is being reanimated. Consumers increasingly celebrate the stories behind the products they buy. The family-owned workshop crafting leather goods, the cooperative of farmers producing gourmet foods, the startup developing smart textiles. Amazon's pivot provides a platform for these narratives to reach national audiences, transforming shopping into a storytelling experience. Expect to see curated Made in America collections accompanied by short documentaries or founder interviews, blending commerce with cultural immersion. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Amazon leaving the US? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.